A shouted command sliced through the cold concrete air, making Danielle Mercer freeze in place. Two guns aimed straight at her chest, flashlight beams cutting across her face as if she were the most dangerous intruder in the entire parking garage. Everything happened so fast that no one had time to take a full breath. One moment, she was reaching into her jacket for her car keys. The next, her entire world had narrowed into two gun barrels and the suspicious eyes of men who believed they had the authority to detain anyone they wanted. Danielle stopped raising her hands slightly, with her palms facing outward, a silent reminder that she posed no threat. Her jacket was still damp from the mist outside, after the long strategy briefing weighing down her shoulders, but her gaze remained steady. She had left the classified session at the Defense Strategy Annex only minutes earlier, her mind still full of maps, arrows, and projected threats. She never imagined the real confrontation tonight would not involve national security strategies, but would unfold right here in this dark concrete basement. Sergeant Robert Hale stepped forward, his stride sharp, his face flushed with tension and a dangerous sort of confidence. Officer Jake Turner, much younger, stood slightly behind him, gripping his weapon as if the slightest movement from Danielle would make him fire. His expression held a mix of caution and unease, while Hale looked at her with a certainty that made her chest tighten for a beat, not from fear, but from familiarity. She had seen that look too many times, the look that decided who she was before she said a word. Hale barked at her to step away from the SUV she had driven for years. His voice echoed between the pillars like a verdict that did not require a trial. Danielle inhaled slowly, not out of confusion, but to maintain calm in a situation spiraling faster than necessary. She tilted her head and answered with a calm that seemed unnatural. "I am standing next to my own car. My name is Danielle Mercer." No reaction, not even a blink of acknowledgement. Hale closed the distance until his breath brushed her collar. He yanked her arm and twisted it behind her back, sending a sharp bolt of pain through her shoulder, then slammed her against the cold concrete pillar. Her laptop bag hit the ground with a flat thud, the sound marking the end of any semblance of basic courtesy. Her military identification card slipped from her jacket pocket and landed at Turner's feet. The high-level security barcode glinted under the neon light. Turner saw it, but he did not pick it up. No one did. Danielle clenched her jaw slightly, not because of the pain, but because of how easily and smoothly the injustice unfolded as if it had been waiting for its cue. Her heartbeat stayed steady, not fast, not panicked. She had lived through nights far worse on deployment. But something else tightened her chest, the dismissal, the assumption, the instant misjudgment, the moment they saw her in a dark hoodie. Turner observed from the side, his eyes flicking briefly to the crease between Hale's brows. He still followed procedure, still held his weapon, but his shoulders were not as rigid as before. Danielle recognized hesitation, a hint of conscience, or simply the instinctive sense that something was wrong, though not enough to change the outcome. People like Turner were always caught between what they knew and what they were told to do. Danielle heard herself think just loud enough for her own mind. Is this really happening? She did not shout. She did not push. She did not try to break free. She knew any wrong move would be instantly reframed as a threat. Instead, she closed her eyes for a single second, one precise second, to sharpen her senses. When she opened them again, the situation was painfully clear. Hale was not looking for truth. He was looking for dominance. And in that moment, pinned against the pillar, she understood the bitter irony. They believed she did not belong here. Yet this garage sat directly beneath the building, where she had just led a strategic meeting that could influence national security. A truth only she understood. A status they could not begin to imagine. Danielle opened her eyes, fully shifted her wrist, just enough to reveal the face of her watch, and with a light touch, she triggered a signal. No sound, no alert, but enough to turn everything upside down. She spoke softly, her voice steady. "You have 10 minutes after that. Everything will be very different." Hale let out a mocking laugh that bounced off the concrete walls. But Danielle, in her silence, felt something he could not sense. A storm was coming. Not from her, but from people who actually held power. People who knew exactly who she was. People who would never tolerate a lieutenant general of the United States Army being treated like a trespasser beneath a government building. A storm Hale could not stop, could not escape, and could never have imagined. Hale's footsteps echoed sharply as he began rifling through Danielle's laptop bag, each movement forceful as if he were trying to prove something to himself. Turner stood nearby, his eyes flickering between doubt and unease. He saw the military identification card lying on the ground, saw the high-level security barcode that no ordinary person could possess. Yet he swallowed his hesitation and stayed silent. Danielle sensed everything. The fear of a subordinate, the arrogance of a man in charge, and something heavier, the shadow of prejudice that had stretched across decades. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, her breathing steady, but inside her mind was working with the speed of someone who had spent too long in environments where a single second of delay could mean an irreversible loss. She noted the position of the ceiling cameras, their angles, the distance to the exit, the timing of Hale's radio call, every tiny detail that most people would overlook. But for her, each one was information. Turner spoke up, his voice unsteady, as if he had to drag his conscience into words. "Sarge, maybe we should check her ID just to be sure." Hale snapped around, his voice clipped and harsh. "You do what I tell you. Turner, do not let someone like her fool you with a few lines." He deliberately pressed on the words, "someone like her," the phrase, dropping the temperature in the garage by a degree. Danielle felt it clearly not unfamiliar, but painfully recognizable. She had heard different versions of that phrase her entire life, on the battlefield, in high-level conference rooms, or out on the street. A heavy silence settled. Turner stepped back and tightened his grip on the gun, using it to hide his discomfort. He did not want to defy his superior, but he also did not want to follow blindly. Danielle saw the struggle. She had trained many young soldiers and could easily recognize the look of decency, not yet strong enough to become action. Hale turned back to the bag, his voice sharp with resentment. "What is this, some kind of encryption device?" "Something sneaky." Danielle answered with a calm so controlled that Turner blinked. "It is a standard military laptop. If you knew what you were looking at, you would see the registration number inside the flap." Hale ignored her and kept searching as if trying to find evidence to justify what he had already decided. Danielle did not react, but deep in her chest, a small fracture opened. Not from fear. From disappointment. Disappointment in the truth. She always tried not to think about that. Even with the responsibility of protecting the country on her shoulders, she could still be treated like a criminal simply because of her skin and a hoodie that did not fit someone else's expectations. The light on her watch blinked once, confirming the signal had been sent. She felt the faint vibration along her wrist, a pulse of certainty traveling through the radio channels toward the people who knew exactly who she was, not a woman in a hoodie in a garage, but a lieutenant general overseeing critical strategic systems. Hale leaned so close he could hear her calm breathing. He laughed dryly. "You think I believe you? You think a few words about who you are will make me stop?" Danielle stayed completely still as her voice dropped smooth and sharp like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I think you are misjudging the person in front of you and the situation you are standing in." Turner looked at her again, this time longer. He saw something in her eyes, not panic, not anger, but a stillness, something dangerous in the way only someone truly protected would stand. On the ground, her military ID remained partially visible, the barcode catching the neon light like a silent warning. Turner stepped toward it, bending slightly as if ready to pick it up, but Hale stopped him with a hand across his arm. "Leave it. I have seen plenty of fakes like that." That was when Danielle heard footsteps from the far entrance of the garage. At first faint and echo, then clearer, sharper, steady, like a ticking clock. She did not turn, but her heart tightened slightly, not from fear, but from confirmation. They were here. Hale noticed nothing. Turner tensed instinctively, sensing something was off even if he could not name it. Danielle whispered, her voice so soft only she could hear it. "Enough." This was the turning point, the moment both sides, the abuser of power and the one dismissed, would be forced to face the truth. Turner looked toward the approaching footsteps. Hale frowned, confused by the sudden shift in the air. And Danielle, still in handcuffs, standing straight with her gaze fixed ahead, recognized what neither of them understood. The 10 minutes were nearly up. And the storm was coming silent, unseen, carrying the weight of a system Hale and Turner could never have imagined. The footsteps grew closer, each one striking the concrete with the steady rhythm of a drum that signaled a shift in the balance of power. Danielle did not turn her head, but every fiber of her body tightened, sensing the change in the air. A soldier trained for many years did not need to look to know when the battlefield had changed. And in that exact second, she knew 10 minutes had passed. Turner's eyes darted toward the ramp leading down into the garage, his throat dry as if he had swallowed sand. He felt something approaching, something Hale, in his intoxication with authority, was still too blind to notice. Hale's broad frame remained planted in front of Danielle as he clung to the illusion of absolute control, oblivious to the way the darkness behind him was being split open by disciplined, chilling footsteps. A faint breeze, real or imagined, slipped past the concrete pillar an instant before a voice cut through the dim space sharp as a blade and commanding, without ever needing to shout, "Step away from that woman immediately." Hale jerked in surprise. Turner nearly jumped upright, and Danielle, still standing with her wrists bound, closed her eyes for the briefest beat. Not from exhaustion, but from relief. The signal had reached exactly where it needed to go. The system had activated. And her true identity was about to unfold in a way Hale could never have predicted. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, moving in perfect unison, the kind of precision shaped by hundreds of coordinated operations. Dark suits, crisp footsteps, and the demeanor of people who did not need to explain who they were. Leading them was a tall, powerfully built man whose cold gaze made the air itself drop a degree. Special Agent Evan Rhodes, a man who could be summoned within minutes by exactly 3 places: the Department of Defense, the Strategic Security Office, and the Pentagon's Emergency Response Center. Rhodes lifted his identification card without needing to step close. Turner took one glance and felt a chill roll down his spine. He recognized that emblem and knew that people who carried it did not appear unless something extremely serious had taken place. Hale, however, still attempted a smirk, believing someone was interfering with his case. "And you are," he demanded. "This area falls under our jurisdiction." Rhodes did not stop walking, did not spare Hale more than a fraction of a glance. His voice was low and heavy, each word dropping like metal onto stone. "I am the person you should be praying does not learn everything you have just done." Turner instinctively stepped back. Hale narrowed his eyes, clinging to denial. "She said a lot of things that were not true. She claimed she was someone in the military. We were handling this according to protocol." And then Rhodes turned to Danielle. One slight nod, one look, carrying the full weight of Pentagon authority. "Lieutenant General Mercer, are you injured anywhere?" The garage fell into a suffocating silence, a silence so dense it seemed to press down on every chest in the room. Turner's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Hale froze completely, his eyes wide, as if struck across the face by the truth. Danielle answered calmly, her voice so steady it made Turner's stomach twist. "My wrists hurt a little." "Nothing serious." Hale stammered his words, trembling, Lieutenant General." Rhodes tilted his head as if observing a strange creature that had just said the most foolish thing of the night. "You heard correctly. And if you failed to recognize the identification of a general officer carrying strategic-level clearance, then the situation is far worse than I expected." Rhodes gave a subtle signal. Two military police officers moved in swift and precise as clockwork. One removed the handcuffs from Danielle using specialized gloves that preserved Hale's fingerprints. The other picked up her military ID from the floor and placed it into an evidence bag. Every action conveyed a single, unmistakable truth. This was no longer a civilian incident. This was now an event of national defense significance. Hale tried to regain control, but his voice shook behind a failing veneer of authority. She did not identify herself. She lied about who she was. Danielle turned toward him slowly, her gaze no longer just calm, but commanding. "I stated my name. The problem is you did not consider it worth listening to." Hale's face drained of color. All bravado vanished. Turner stood motionless, his hands trembling regret spreading across his young features. He looked at Danielle no longer as a suspect, but as someone whose truth would haunt him for the rest of his life. Rhodes stepped forward, his voice rumbling through the garage like distant thunder. "You handcuffed a general officer with access to strategic defense systems. That is not just overstepping authority. That is a federal violation. And from this moment on, every second of your actions will be investigated in complete detail." A cold stillness swept through the garage, silent and heavy like the surface of a lake before a storm. Danielle stood tall, the red marks still visible on her wrists, her eyes blazing with a presence that seemed to shrink the entire room. No one in that garage doubted who she was anymore. No one dared see her as a stranger in a hoodie. Her true identity had been revealed, and the storm had only just begun. The atmosphere in the garage shifted the instant Danielle's true identity was spoken. The air tightened heavy and unmoving, as if every dust particle had frozen in place to witness what would happen next. Turner swallowed hard, guilt rising in him like a violent wave. He had not meant to do anything wrong. He had not wanted to. But he had stayed silent. And sometimes silence was the most dangerous part of a mistake. Rhodes stepped forward, the sharp taps of his dress shoes echoing coldly against the concrete. Hale began to sway like a tower losing its foundation. He tried to rebuild the shell of authority he had relied on, but his eyes already betrayed him, scattered, shaken, afraid. Not the fear of being scolded, but the fear of something he could not control. Danielle rotated her wrist slightly, feeling the burn where the cuffs had dug into her skin. She did not look at the marks. She looked at Hale instead, her gaze calm to the point of being terrifying. She had endured battlefield interrogations, national strategic briefings, missions, where a single wrong decision could cost hundreds of lives. A local officer's abuse of power could not shake her, but it chilled her with disappointment. Rhodes signaled to the legal team accompanying him. One activated a specialized recording device, another scanned the scene with forensic lenses. They moved with discipline, every gesture efficient and precise. Turner watched them, and it felt like he was witnessing a different version of justice, one that was orderly, sharp, unforgiving. A kind of justice he had never seen inside his own department. Danielle took a deep breath, letting her shoulders settle. Then she spoke not loudly, but with a force that pierced through the entire garage. I told you who I am. I told you I was unarmed. I asked for verification, but you did not listen. Hale reacted on instinct, trying to cling to the authority slipping through his fingers. You look suspicious. We were just doing our job. The excuse clattered to the ground like rusted metal. And Turner knew the moment Hale said it that everything had collapsed. Rhodes did not let Danielle respond. He faced Hale, his expression unyielding. Do you know what she looks like? She looks like someone you are not qualified to assess, and clearly not someone you had any right to lay a hand on. Turner shivered. Hale opened his mouth, ready to protest, but no sound came out. Rhodes continued. Do you know which briefing she just left? Or did you think people with strategic clearance wander around concrete pillars for fun? Each sentence was a hammer blow against Hale's already crumbling pride. Danielle watched him. She did not smirk. She did not raise her voice. But her eyes said everything. Your failure was not from lack of information. It was from lack of respect. The legal team began extracting footage from the garage cameras. Turner watched them work each second, replaying his own complicity. Fragments of memory flashed through his mind. The frightened face of a woman he had once shouted at during a routine stop, the way a young boy had flinched when Turner reached for his weapon, simply because he moved too quickly. Tiny moments he had once considered normal. They no longer felt normal. Rhodes approached Danielle. His tone was low, respectful. Lieutenant General Mercer, the command vehicle is ready above ground. We will escort you to the Department of Defense physician before initiating the full report. And everything these two men did will be documented from the very first second. Danielle nodded. She did not waste words, but before walking away, she turned to look at Turner. Not at Hale. Turner. Her gaze softened just slightly, though still firm. When you spoke earlier, you wanted to do the right thing. Next time, do not just want to. Turner froze, lips parting without sound. That sentence would stay with him for a long time. Behind him, Hale tried to grasp at a lifeline, his voice trembling. We just did not know who you were. Danielle gave him one last look. Not angry, not contemptuous, just the truth spoken by someone who had lived her entire life under the shadow of prejudice. Correct. You did not know. But you also did not want to know. A heavy silence hit the garage floor. Then Danielle turned away, and in that exact moment, Hale finally understood something he should have noticed from the beginning. The person he treated like an anonymous suspect was someone who could shake an entire branch of government with a single touch of her watch. And this was only the beginning. Silence followed Danielle's footsteps, spreading through the garage like a thin layer of cold mist settling over every concrete surface. But beneath that stillness were faint rhythmic vibrations like metal tapping against metal, the sound of devices activating. Rhodes had given the signal. The technical team was already at work, and everything that had happened in the previous 10 minutes no longer belonged to Hale or Turner. It now belonged to the system. Danielle walked slowly toward the exit, her breathing steady, but inside her chest another fracture was widening. A fracture invisible to the eye, yet sharp enough for her to feel deeply. A smoldering truth, like hot ash. No matter how many titles she held, no matter how many medals she earned, no matter how many operations she had commanded overseas, she could still be seen with suspicion simply for standing alone in a dark parking garage wearing a hoodie that displayed no badge of authority. She had witnessed that reality for her entire life. But when it struck her directly in such a brutal way, it still burned. Behind her, Turner watched her go, his thoughts tangled like a knot of exposed wires. He felt the gulf between what he believed justice was and what had just unfolded. Danielle's gaze still lingered in his mind like a question he could not dodge. If you know what is right but stay silent, are you any different from what is wrong? Turner lowered his head, guilt settling heavily on his young shoulders, making him look years older in minutes. Hale was different. He was not just regretful, he was bitter. His familiar sense of power had been ripped apart in full view. His mind raced chaotically, suspension, investigation, accusations of discrimination. But what bothered him most was not the loss of authority. It was the truth he could not escape. He had been wrong, completely wrong, and he knew Rhodes had seen every bit of it. One of the agents approached Hale and Turner, handing each of them a sealed form. His voice was dry, flat like desert wind. "We are confiscating your communication devices and service weapons for federal investigation. You are restricted from interfering with any part of this case until verification is complete." Hale opened his mouth to argue, but Rhodes cut him off with a voice sharp as a command. "I advise you to choose every word very carefully. Everything here is on camera, including what you said earlier." Turner closed his eyes and let out a heavy breath. He remembered every word Hale had spoken about Danielle, every syllable laced with prejudice, and Turner knew he had stood silent beside it. He had not said those words, but his silence made him feel no better than the one who had. At the far end, Danielle stepped onto the ramp leading upward. She did not turn back, but she felt the shift happening behind her. The watch on her wrist blinked once with a soft blue light, confirming the authentication system had updated. Every piece of evidence, every camera angle, every sound had already been uploaded to a federal data center. No one could hide anything. No one could edit anything. Everything was locked, under the oversight of people with far more power than Hale could ever imagine. Danielle inhaled deeply as the outside air washed over her. Streetlights cast a glow across her face, revealing a calm that was both sharp and quiet. A part of her wanted to stop to breathe, to let the anger dissolve. But she remained composed because she understood something simple: true power never needed to shout. It only needed to exist. A black SUV waited at the curb, the door opening automatically, the cabin light spilling out like a boundary between chaos behind her and order ahead. Danielle paused for a brief moment, resting her hand on the doorframe, feeling a faint tremor in her palm. Not from fear, from something deeper. Exhaustion. Not exhaustion from hail, but from carrying an endless reserve of patience every time she walked into a place where she was not fully seen for who she was. Rhodes stepped up behind her, his voice low, meant only for her. "If you want to stop here, we can handle the rest, on your behalf." Danielle shook her head, her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. "No. I need to see this through myself. Not for me, but for the people who will never have the chance to send the kind of signal I did." Rhodes nodded, respect replacing formality. He knew she was right. Too many people were treated like suspects simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong skin tone or the wrong assumptions cast upon them. And most of them did not have a military network to protect them. Hale and Turner remained inside the garage. Turner watched Danielle as if she were a living reminder of the path he now had to choose. Hale stared with fear turning to bitterness. Danielle looked only forward, her eyes deep and steady like dark water. For a fleeting moment she wondered, how long will it take before people like me stop being judged in the dark, before we are seen in the light? The SUV door closed, separating her from the garage. And in that moment, Turner understood nothing. From here would ever go back to the way it was. Danielle settled into the back seat of the SUV, her spine resting against the soft leather, though her body refused to fully relax. The warm amber light inside the cabin wrapped everything in an eerie quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos in the garage only minutes earlier. The door closed gently, yet the sound felt like a punctuation mark between two worlds, the one she had just left behind and the one she was about to face. The driver, a communications officer from the Department of Defense, glanced at her through the mirror for only a moment, but that moment carried unmistakable respect. No introductions were needed. No explanations required. Everyone in this vehicle knew exactly who she was, and that knowledge tightened something deep inside her chest, the rare feeling of being seen for her true identity, something that minutes before had been completely stripped away. The SUV glided up the exit ramp, merging smoothly into the sparse evening traffic of Alexandria. But as soon as the car joined the quiet flow of nighttime vehicles, an invisible weight began to press onto Danielle's shoulders. It didn't come from the confrontation itself, but from something older, deeper, more persistent memory. Memories of her father, a black man who always lowered his shoulders when walking past police officers despite never having broken a law. Memories of the survival lessons her grandmother taught her not to thrive, but simply to stay safe. And memories of being 16 years old followed for an hour in a bookstore because the clerk thought the book she carried was too expensive for someone like her. Small things, but stacked together, they formed scars only those who lived them could feel. The SUV moved smoothly, but inside Danielle, those memories surged with every breath merging with what had just happened in the garage. She could not deny the bitterness rising within her. A lieutenant general with strategic clearance could still be yanked out of ordinary life and shoved into the role of a suspect in a matter of seconds, all because of two wrong assumptions from two wrong eyes. Rhodes sat beside her, observing quietly. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. If you need time, we can stop at the medical station before heading to the office." Danielle shook her head. "I am not seriously injured. What I need now is not medical care. I need the truth." Rhodes understood. He asked nothing more. The SUV continued down the road, and Danielle gazed out the window. Outside, the city looked painfully calm, as if the world had not trembled at all under what had happened earlier. The yellow streetlights flowed past like glimpses of a peaceful life. She had always longed to have a life where people saw her for who she was not, for her skin color or her rank. But it was not a privilege she had, and she accepted that. Because if no one stood firm at the front lines of injustice, who would protect those who never had a voice? A soft vibration on her wrist pulled her back to the present. Her watch indicated that the garage data had been fully encrypted and transmitted to the federal system. A lifetime in the military had taught her to trust structure, trust protocol, trust the machine. But tonight, that trust had been tested by her own lived experience. Rhodes received the same update. He glanced at his phone, scanned the preliminary report, and his tone carried unmasked gravity. "Federal legal authorities have begun assessing the severity of the violations. Those 2 officers will be removed from duty before the night is over." Danielle closed her eyes for a brief second. Removal from duty was not the goal. Punishment was not the goal. What she needed was bigger change. But real change had never come easily. The SUV turned onto a narrow road leading to the regional command building where she would have to recount every detail. Danielle felt every vibration of the vehicle like a reminder of countless people who had experienced what she did but never reached a safe ending. She rested her head against the seat and let her thoughts form into the question. No one ever dared to ask aloud, but every person like her carried silently. If I were not a lieutenant general, how would tonight have ended? The question pierced her heart like a cold needle, because she knew the answer too well. The SUV came to a stop. Rhodes opened the door for her. As Danielle stepped out, the night wind brushed her face, carrying the damp chill of the city. She stood tall, straightened her jacket, and felt as though she had just crossed an invisible threshold. She was walking into a different kind of battle, not one fought with bullets, but with procedures, explanations, accountability, and truth. A battle that at times was more exhausting than any mission she had ever commanded. Rhodes walked beside her in silence, but the respect in his eyes was the gentlest reassurance she had received that night. And in that moment, Danielle made a clear decision. She would not let this become just another incident. It had to become a lesson for the system, for those who abused their authority, and for those who believed they were doing their job while staying silent at the very moment their voice mattered most. She drew a deep breath and stepped into the command building. Tonight, the truth would begin here. As the glass doors slid open, Danielle stepped into the command building's lobby. The cold white lights spilled across the polished stone floor, making everything appear too clean, too still a space that contrasted sharply with the storm still twisting inside her chest. The night shift officers straightened the moment they saw Rhodes and immediately recognized the high-ranking figure walking beside him, but Danielle only nodded once. She was not here for greetings. She was here to begin an untangling. A small briefing room had already been prepared. Screens glowed, documents were open. Colonel Mitchell, the regional legal oversight chief, waited inside. He stood as if attempting to convey the utmost respect for the woman now entering the room. Danielle motioned for him to sit. She had no patience for ceremony when something far more important needed attention. Mitchell began, his tone firm. "We have reviewed part of the footage. Lieutenant General, would you like to recount the full incident from your perspective?" Danielle exhaled softly. The moment before telling a story was always the most exhausting. To tell it was to relive it. But truth had to begin with the person who endured it. She described every second from leaving the classified meeting to the first shout, to the way Hale twisted her arm and slammed her against the pillar, to Turner's conflicted expression, to her military ID lying untouched at their feet. Her voice remained even and steady without trembling or anger, but each sentence carried the weight of someone accustomed to hiding pain beneath composure. Mitchell listened, his face tightening with every detail. When Danielle reached the phrase, "someone like her," the entire room seemed to grow a degree colder. Rhodes clenched his hand once, but stayed silent, letting Danielle finish. Mitchell opened a data file, rotating the screen toward her. "Lieutenant General, would you like to see the garage footage from that moment?" Danielle hesitated for a single second, then nodded. The footage played. Black and white, grainy, but painfully clear. Hale approaching her as if subduing a dangerous criminal. Turner in the background, eyes confused, uncertain, but silent. Danielle, even while being shoved, twisted, cuffed, still standing straight, still trying to speak calmly. From the outside, the scene looked even harsher than living through it. When the footage showed Turner noticing the ID card and refusing to pick it up, Danielle felt her heart pull tight for one beat. Not because he meant harm, but because he was afraid. And that fear suffocated her more than any hostility. Mitchell paused the video. The room fell into a long silence so deep that the hum of the ventilation system became the only sound. Finally, he spoke, voice low. "Lieutenant General, what level of action do you want us to pursue? Local discipline, federal investigation, or escalation to the Department of Justice?" Inspector General Danielle closed her eyes briefly. That question pressed on her like a stone, not because of power, but because of responsibility. If she chose leniency, it would become another excuse for future disrespect. If she chose severity, the entire force would shake, but would it fix the root? Danielle opened her eyes and met Mitchell's directly. "I want a full investigation. Not just those two officers, the procedure, the culture, every similar incident in the region. I want everything on the table." Mitchell froze for half a second. This level of request carried immense consequences. But he did not challenge her. In her eyes, he saw a decision not made for revenge, but to prevent someone else from becoming her, except without the luck of being rescued in time. Rhodes spoke next, his tone steel. "The Department of Defense will support all of it. No one will be shielded. No one." Danielle nodded, then rose from her seat. "I do not want this investigation centered on me. It is not about me. It is about something far bigger." Mitchell stood as well, genuine respect in his expression. "Would you like to issue an official statement before word begins leaking?" Danielle remained silent for a long moment, then said, only one line. "Let them know I have been heard, and I will make sure others are heard too." Mitchell wrote down every word, each one heavy as stone, each one marking the beginning of a new battle. When Danielle left the room, she stepped into a long corridor, the overhead lights reflecting her shadow across the floor. Her face did not show anger nor exhaustion, but a steady resolve only those who had stood on the edge between life and death could carry. Rhodes followed a few steps behind, watching her silhouette, then murmured to himself, "This will not be a case. This will be a beginning." Danielle did not turn back, but she heard him, and something inside her, the part still bruised, still aching, softened just slightly. Until tonight, she had stood alone. But from this moment on, she was no longer alone. And this was only the first stage of the quake. The next would shake an entire system. Danielle walked through the main hallway of the command building, where the fluorescent lights were so bright they made everything appear painfully clear, almost unforgiving. She moved more slowly now, as if each step carried her deeper into something she knew would not be just an investigation, but a confrontation with the system's own truth. Officers passing by paused, some offering a salute, others remaining silent, but in their eyes, Danielle saw something she was not sure she wanted to see: admiration mixed with uncertainty. Word had already spread, or at least enough had spread for everyone to know that tonight was not ordinary. A young officer hurried up, handing Rhodes a small metal case. "This is the encrypted copy of the camera data. Colonel Mitchell asked that the Lieutenant General review it whenever she is ready." Rhodes accepted it, but Danielle shook her head. "No need. The truth is clear enough. What I want to see now is how they react in the morning." The SUV carried her out of the command building and toward her apartment in Old Town Alexandria. The city remained peaceful. People still strolling shops closed at their usual hours, no one aware that a wave was forming in the very place they believed was safest. Danielle sat still, her hands resting on her lap, her gaze drifting across the window. The dark glass reflected her face back at her. A version of herself who had just endured humiliation, yet carried her dignity intact, a version who knew that her calm would unsettle more people than any outburst ever could. When the SUV stopped in front of her building, Rhodes turned and asked, "Would you like us to stay on watch outside tonight?" Danielle allowed herself a faint smile, the first real one of the night. "No. I spent half my life in combat zones. A quiet night like this does not scare me." Rhodes nodded, though his eyes still carried genuine concern. Because despite her rank, despite the entire system behind her tonight, Danielle had not just been disrespected. She had been reminded that even the strongest can be dragged into the weakest position under the wrong gaze. She stepped inside. Her apartment was small but warm, the soft yellow lights coming on automatically. Everything was exactly as she had left it earlier in the afternoon. But the calmness of the space made her chest tighten. Part of her wanted to remove the uniform, to lay down every responsibility, but the stronger part knew she was far from finished. She poured herself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened her military laptop. A new email appeared instantly: preliminary report from the Federal Investigation Office. The text was short, precise, without a single unnecessary line, assessing potential investigation under federal civil rights violation standards. Danielle read it, then closed the laptop. She did not need more details to understand the magnitude. Then her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated a moment before answering. A familiar voice came through, deep and measured: Army General Harold Bennett, the man who had mentored Danielle back when she was a captain. "I just heard what happened. We will not let this be dismissed. But I called to ask, are you all right?" The question made Danielle fall silent. A heavy-weighted silence. Then she answered quietly, "I am all right. But I am angry. Not for myself. For those who will never have the chance I had tonight." Bennett exhaled slowly. "You will not fight this alone. I promise." After the call ended, Danielle stood and walked to the large window overlooking the empty street. The street lamps cast her silhouette long against the curtain. A straight figure, steady but carrying a fatigue. Only she could feel the fatigue born from years of having to prove herself twice as much as anyone else. She whispered almost to herself, "Tomorrow they will know. Not because I am a lieutenant general, but because I was treated as if I were nothing." She rested her forehead lightly against the window pane, her breath fogging the glass in a thin mist. In that moment, the loneliness of true authority settled around her more clearly than ever. People like her were never defeated by the battlefield. They were worn down by moments like this, by wrong assumptions, by the quiet cuts of bias. But tonight she did not fall. She stood tall. She spoke the truth. She activated the system. And that not the rank on her shoulders was what made her stronger than anyone who had tried to diminish her. In the small apartment under the warm golden light, Danielle closed her eyes. Not to escape, but to prepare. Because tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The next morning did not arrive with blaring alarms or urgent phone calls. It arrived with a strange kind of silence. A silence so unfamiliar that Danielle, someone who had lived most of her life inside the relentless rhythm of the military, felt more unsettled than she ever had during overnight deployments overseas. She woke at 7 o'clock, the pale gold light of early morning slipping through the curtains. Everything in her apartment looked the same, untouched, but nothing felt the same. What happened last night was no longer an incident. It was becoming a truth, spreading outward in quiet, powerful waves, like an unseen earthquake. Her phone vibrated. A message from the Pentagon communications office. "The media has the story. We advise you to remain silent until we release the official statement." Danielle set the phone down. She was not surprised. One word leaked from someone at the precinct, and the press would find the rest on their own. But what made her pause was the sound at her door. 3 knocks, soft but firm. Danielle opened it. Turner stood there. The young officer looked smaller, somehow. His shoulders drawn in, his face pale from lack of sleep. His eyes no longer held the forced stiffness of a man pretending to be strong, but the look of someone who had finally seen himself clearly and did not like what he saw. "Lieutenant General Tasso, so sorry." His voice trembled. Not the fear of standing before a superior, the fear of shame. Danielle did not invite him in immediately. She looked at him for a long moment. Her gaze was soft enough not to break him on the spot, but sharp enough to make it clear that an apology could not erase what happened. Turner lowered his head, his hands clasping together as if trying to steady them. "I saw your ID. I should have spoken up. I should have stopped him. But I was scared. I was scared to contradict my superior. I was scared of ruining everything. His voice cracked. Danielle spoke slowly. "You were afraid of losing your job. I understand. But do you know what he almost made me lose? Not my reputation, not my authority, but the peace I spent a lifetime earning." Turner looked up, and in his eyes Danielle saw something raw and honest. What she did not expect was the next thing he said. "I was scared because I realized I did not have the courage to do the right thing. And I do not want to be that kind of person." The admission fell between them like a confession, stripping him bare, exposing not just him but the system that shaped him. Danielle watched him for a few more seconds. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in." Turner sat on the chair across her small kitchen table, his back straight as if he were sitting in a disciplinary review. Danielle did not sit right away. She stood by the window, the sunlight catching her face, deepening the shadows beneath her eyes, making her look both tired and unbreakable. Listen, what happened last night was not just a mistake. It was a lesson, not just for you, for your entire system. And remember this. Even if you stay silent out of fear, your silence still helps injustice win. Turner swallowed hard. I want to make it right. I know I cannot undo what I did, but I want to help in any way you need. Danielle turned and looked straight at him. What I need is not redemption for myself. What I need is your testimony. Every detail. No hiding, no softening, no protecting anyone. If you can do that, I will respect you. Turner nodded quickly as if someone had handed him something heavy, yet necessary to carry. I will. I promise. Danielle's voice lowered, but its strength doubled. And Turner, do not let this be the last time you choose to speak. Turner covered his face with both hands, exhaling deeply, as if releasing years of pressure, years of wanting to be a good officer, but not knowing how to rise above the expectations that trapped him. When he left, Turner paused at the doorway and turned back. Lieutenant General, I know you did not need me last night. But starting today, if you want to fight for change, I will stand with you. Danielle did not smile, but her eyes softened. I do not need you to stand with me. I need you to stand with what is right. Turner nodded and walked away, his steps lighter, firmer. In that moment, Danielle understood something profound. Some battles begin with injustice, but the force that changes the world is not just the anger of the wronged. It is the awakening of the bystanders. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a media alert. The story had spread across the entire capital region. Her name was already appearing on morning broadcasts, alongside questions, speculation, and analysis. Danielle looked at the screen, her eyes no longer burning with the hurt from the night before, but lit instead with a new kind of resolve. A resolve driven not by pain, but by duty. The storm had risen from the dark garage, and now the entire city was watching her next move. Danielle drew in a deep breath. It was time. There was no turning back. News traveled faster than Danielle expected. When she stepped into the temporary Department of Defense office in Arlington, multiple screens were broadcasting the morning headlines, Lieutenant General illegally handcuffed in federal garage. Questions rise about systemic bias in law enforcement, true identity shocks local police department. Her name, Danielle Mercer, appeared beside grainy footage of her pinned against a concrete pillar, hands cuffed behind her back, her face calm in a way that unsettled anyone watching. But as she entered the briefing room, she found no chaos, only anticipation. Rhodes was already there, along with Colonel Mitchell, 2 federal attorneys, and a representative from the Department of Justice's Office of Internal Oversight. All of them stood when she walked in, as if her presence was not merely that of a victim, but of the catalyst that had just triggered a structural reckoning. Danielle sat, though she did not lean back. The deepest part of her was prepared for the second wave, one quieter than last night, yet far more powerful, because this was the wave of a system confronting its own failure. Mitchell opened his laptop, his tone solemn. The preliminary findings are complete. What occurred was not procedural error. It was a violation involving discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and a complete failure to follow federal identity verification standards. Rhodes continued, his voice like a ruling hail is being suspended immediately. Turner resigned before the investigation notice reached him. But that is only the beginning. Their supervising officers, the ones who approved their training protocols, will also be reviewed. Danielle listened without nodding or shaking her head. She remained still the stillness of a lake after a storm, because she knew this truth was not here for revenge. It was here to correct. One of the federal attorneys slid a document toward her. "Lieutenant General, this is a draft statement if you wish to address the media." Danielle glanced at it for a single second, then shook her head. "No, I will write it myself." She picked up a pen. The room fell into a breathless silence as she wrote slowly, firmly, every word carrying weight. "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for proper procedure. I do not want anyone punished because I am a lieutenant general. I want everyone protected, no matter who they are. And I will continue working to ensure that what happened last night never becomes the fate of anyone else." She set the pen down. The people in the room read the statement, then looked up at her with a mix of respect and awakening. Rhodes murmured, "Lieutenant General, this sentence will travel far." Danielle answered softly, "I hope it reaches the right places." At that moment, an aide rushed in, tense but composed. "Update just received. Alexandria Police Department will hold a press conference in 2 hours. They will announce suspensions and issue a formal apology." Mitchell turned to Danielle. "Do you want to be present at the press conference?" Danielle stared at the table for a brief moment. Part of her wanted to stand before the cameras to speak the truth in her own voice. But a deeper instinct, the instinct of someone who had commanded troops and understood how power should operate, reminded her to keep distance. A general does not chase microphones. A general creates impact through action, not spectacle. She shook her head gently. "I do not need to be there, but they need to speak, and the system needs to change." The room settled into a silence full of agreement. 30 minutes later, as she walked through the hallway, Danielle encountered a group of young soldiers waiting to greet her. In their eyes, she saw not just admiration, but hope. Hope that the woman before them, the one dismissed so easily the night before, now stood as their voice for today. A young female soldier, likely barely over 20, said softly, "Lieutenant General, I saw the video. I have never seen anyone stay that calm in a situation like that." Danielle offered a faint smile, the kind of smile only someone who had carried too much for too long could give. Calm does not mean unafraid. It means knowing fear will not keep you alive. She placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "And because I knew there were people who would stand for me, even if they did not appear right away." When Danielle stepped outside, the late morning sunlight washed across her face, igniting a fierce resolve in her eyes. The weight of last night still rested on her, but it was no longer a stone pressing down. It had become a weapon, a tool she would wield to bring real change. The car arrived, the door opened, but Danielle did not get in immediately. She looked toward the busy street where people carried on with their lives, unaware of the shift unfolding behind closed doors. She inhaled deeply, letting the morning breeze clear the final remnants of the storm inside her. Then she spoke to herself, but also to everyone who would one day hear her story. Strength is not standing above others. Strength is standing tall when others see you as the lowest. Danielle stepped into the vehicle. The fight had changed form, and this time, she was not fighting for herself. She was fighting for those without signals to send for help, without rank to be heard, without a system standing behind them. The vehicle pulled away. Her story had risen from the parking garage, and now it belonged to an entire nation that needed to wake up. From the perspective of a specialist in security and systems governance, Danielle Mercer's story does not simply reveal the personal failures of two officers. It exposes the deeper layers of structural bias, the kind of bias that can make even a lieutenant general appear suspicious in a matter of seconds. And it was her calm, her discipline, and her strategic mindset that forced the entire system to face itself. This is not a story about power. It is a lesson in responsibility, the responsibility to listen before judging the responsibility to speak up when injustice unfolds right in front of us. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, be sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter. And before you leave the video, leave a short comment. Just 3 words as a reminder of the value of fairness. Comment. See and understand.